Hey girls, I'm Jenny and I am this week bringing canoeing to our weekly skills share session. So I think it's the first skills share we've had where we've talked about any kind of water sports. And as I said, I'm going to be talking about canoeing. So I'm going to be talking about a trip I took a couple of years ago, and we planned a trip to paddle the Great Glen Way, which is in Scotland. The Glen is a 60-mile canoe trail. It was Scotland's first official canoe trail, and it runs from Fort William to Inverness. And most people paddle it from Fort William to Inverness rather than the other way around, because that's the way that you get the wind. It started as any adventure does. We started planning, getting excited, looking at lots of maps, reading lots of books, doing lots of research. I should probably add there were 4 of us, so there were me and my partner and my dad and his partner. So my dad's a very experienced paddler. He paddled whitewater kayaks for years and has pretty much always paddled. So he used to be an instructor, so he's got quite a lot of experience. So with that, I've grown up sort of paddling and dipped in and out of it as I've grown up really, and really picked it back up in the last sort of few years. So yeah, we started planning, we did lots of research. There's an incredible website called Great Glen Canoe Trail.info, and it includes everything you would ever need to know from the trail organisers, and they do everything on that website. You get all the maps, you get all the information, you get all the info about where you can camp, where you can't camp, hotels, official campsites, wild camp spots, everything. So if you're ever thinking of doing something like that, definitely head to your Google, because it is the one. However, I think the main reason that Laura's asked me to speak tonight is that this was an adventure that didn't go to plan. And you're probably sitting there telling me that no adventure really goes to plan, but this one really didn't. So our plan was to paddle the Great Glen. We were going to start in Fort William, paddle down to Inverness, and then me and my partner were going to flip and cycle back from Inverness to Fort William. That was the plan. Plan did not go very successfully. Mother Nature is not something you can fight. So we started our paddle late, and that was for a multitude of reasons. But partly because of the weather, and so we'd started I think 3 days late in the end, and the day that all our team finally arrived, we were going to start, and then it poured rain all day, so we actually ended up camping in a hotel car park, because that was the only place we could stay at that point. It was too wet and too late to think about doing anything else, so we stayed in the car park. So we did technically the first day and a half's paddle in the first day, because if you look at the route, the first day's paddle is actually a really short paddle. And then we stopped at this glorious wild camping spot, looked out for the mountains, we had a fire, it was great. So it was all going really well. We went to bed, woke up the next morning, and it was one of those mornings where you wake up in your tent and there is no way you're getting out of your tent. So we didn't. We had 2 tents between the 4 of us, and we didn't even discuss not getting out of our tents. We just didn't get up. Everyone went back to sleep, woke up again in a few hours, and then we got up and sort of had a discussion about what we were going to do. So the wind had really picked up overnight, and it had been raining. So we made quite a tough decision in an already limited time frame to stick it out for another day. We were in a glorious wild camp spot. We got plenty of food. We'd got wine. So, I mean, what else do you do? We were in a glorious spot. The weather wasn't great. We'd looked at the wave forecasts for the next bit of water we were supposed to be paddling, and they were looking pretty big. So my partner and my dad's partner are both pretty unexperienced paddlers, and I am relatively unexperienced in quite moving water. So we made the decision that we were going to stay for a second night. We stayed for a second night. We woke up the following day, and the weather hadn't improved at all. And actually we looked at the wave forecasts for the next couple of blocks and they were looking horrendous. So we made the really tough decision at that point to pull out. So we'd only paddled for a day. We were supposed to be paddling for 5. And so we pulled out. We were in a spot where my partner and I could hike back to the car. We were actually coincidentally camped in a spot where we could drive the cars straight up to where we were camped, or pretty much straight up to where we were camped. So we made the tough decision that at that point we were going to pull out. So my partner and I hiked back to get the cars, we did some car shuffling, and we packed up and got out of that wild camping spot the following morning. It was pretty tough. It wasn't what any of us wanted to do. It wasn't what any of us were planning to do. But you can't always fight Mother Nature. So we didn't. We did, however, find some, we'll call them glamping pods, on a really nice site for that night. We got an Airbnb booked for the weekend that we'd pre-booked for when we got to Inverness. So we only had one night that we were missing accommodation for. So we found these really nice glamping pods. They were just empty huts, but it was on a really nice site. There was a communal cooking area, and it was a really nice place for us to stay, actually, and a really enjoyable place for us to stay overnight, while we sort of dwelled on the fact that we hadn't done what we set out to do. But all hope was not lost, because if you remember, there was 2 parts to this trip for my partner and I. Our plan when we got to Inverness was to cycle the trail back all the way up to Fort William. So we had a second week planned. We had a weekend, a couple of days in Inverness, just milled around for a little bit. And then on the Monday morning, we packed our bikes up. Top tip, if you're gonna go bike packing, pre-pack your bike before you leave. For some unknown reason, my planning self had just not packed my bike kit onto my bike before we left. I was okay. I've got a relatively good selection of kit, but my partner struggled a little bit with some of his kit. But we got there, we packed the bikes, and we headed off. Now, what I haven't told you is that for all the planning we did for the canoe part of the trip, we actually didn't do very much planning for the cycling part of the trip. So we had the maps, we were following the maps, but we hadn't actually done that much planning for the cycling bit of the trip, because, you know, when you've done a trip one way, all you've got to do is get back the other way. It's never quite as easy as it works out to be. So to cut quite a convoluted story short, we pulled that trip short too. We had terrible weather. We cycled for the first day, and for about half of the first day it poured with rain, and we found a camp spot for the first night, and the weather just didn't improve. It was one of those nights where you were in your tent by 7 and didn't leave. It rained all night. We got up the following morning and it was still raining. We got back on our bikes, it was still raining, and it just didn't let up. And there were hills, and we did a lot of walking up hills, pushing the bikes. We did a lot of crying up hills, and we got to a point where it was thoroughly unenjoyable. I'm quite a stubborn person, so if I'd have been on my own, I'd probably have stuck it out. I'd have had a bit more flexibility, but we weren't. There was a group of us. My partner and I were riding together, and my dad and his partner had gone to spend a few days in Skye. So we got to the top of quite a steep hill, just as sort of morale was really hitting a low, and we got the real dagger to the chest moment, and my dad phoned and he was like, there's yellow wind and rain warnings for the next 3 days, so we think we're going to pack up and go home tomorrow. Which is fine. We had 2 separate vehicles, we could have done it, but I looked at my partner and we made a decision quite promptly that was going to be thoroughly unenjoyable. So we cycled down to the next town and we stopped at a pub. It's a miracle how a clean, dry change of clothes, a warm pub, and a pint and some dinner will change your outlook on life. But we'd made a decision at that point that we were going to stop. It wasn't all bad. We had the huge highlight for the canoeing trip, for the cycling half of the trip, was finding the Abriacan Eco Cafe. It's an incredible place. It's an entirely eco cafe and it's in the middle of the woods. It's just off the trail, and the couple that have been running it for I think almost 30 years, never having a day off, and all of the food is home cooked food. So when we stopped, we had homemade soup, homemade cakes, the hugest mug of hot chocolate I've ever seen in my life that came with biscuits, crackers, biscuits, chocolate and marshmallows. And the soup came with cheese and crackers. So, I mean, what more can you ask for? So it wasn't all bad. And I think what's really important to take out is that there's always a silver lining in a trip. You know, no trip is 100% bad. If we'd have gone out to have a 2-week holiday where we did a bit of cycling and a bit of canoeing and a bit of sightseeing, we'd have done exactly what we planned and we'd have had an incredible 2 weeks. Because we planned to canoe for a week and we planned to cycle for a week, the trip that we planned didn't happen, but that didn't mean we didn't have a really good time. And I have rambled for a really long time about the trip and not really told you very much about kit. But if you've got any kit questions, then pop them in the comments or pop them on the live stream on Monday night, and I will do my best to answer them, whether they're about the Great Glen Trail or whether they're about canoeing in general. I'm not a supper, but if they're water-based questions, I can try and help you. Yeah, so that is my little story about an adventure that didn't really go as planned. Any questions, pop them in the comments, and I will see you guys for a live stream on Monday.